South Windows, factory direct impact resistant windows, engineered for strength to insulate and protect your home from hurricanes and break-ins. New South proud. Learn more at newsouthwindows.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, how a warming world impacts the health of pregnant women and infants. We talk about the growing number of heat risk days on the First Coast and explain why the danger doesn't disappear when the sun goes down. Then, the #1 Airbnb in Florida grew out of a Hurricane Irma calamity. We meet the owner of the shipping container house that's become an internet sensation. And how a series of greeting cards morphed into one of the longest-running off-Broadway shows in history. We welcome the cast of Nonsense. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@WJCT.
Washington on Corva Coleman, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says the Western Military Alliance is assessing today's incident in Poland. Nearly 20 large Russian attack drones flew into Polish airspace. Polish and NATO warplanes shot down some of them. Poland is asked to invoke Article 4 of the NATO treaty, a meeting where the allies review a potential threat. NPR's Rob Schmitz has more on today's incursion.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says fighter jets from both NATO and Poland were scrambled to shoot down the Russian drones that had entered Polish airspace overnight. The operation marks the first time that a NATO country has directly engaged Russian assets in its airspace since Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Tusk called the incursion a large-scale provocation by Russia. On Tuesday, Poland said it would close its borders with Belarus due to what it called aggressive military exercises, as well as a growing number of provocations from Russia and Belarus. In 2022, a stray Ukrainian missile struck a Polish village, killing 2 people. Rob Schmitz, NPR News, Berlin.
A top Russian diplomat in Poland says accusations that Russia launched drones into Poland is groundless. He says Polish authorities have provided no evidence the drones were even Russian. He also says Russia has no interest in escalating anything with Poland. South Korea has chartered a flight to bring back more than 300 South Korean workers detained at a battery plant in Georgia last week. NPR's Anthony Kuhn reports from Seoul.
South Korea's foreign ministry says it aims to bring the workers home as quickly as possible, but adds that unspecified delays mean the chartered flight might not be able to immediately return to South Korea. One area of disagreement is that South Korea wants its workers to be able to leave voluntarily so that they can return to the United States at some point, while the Trump administration wants them to be deported, which could prevent them from coming back. South Korea's Foreign Minister Cho Hyun is expected to discuss the matter with Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Washington. Experts see a clash of priorities as the Trump administration tries to both attract high-tech manufacturing and tighten border controls. Anthony Kuhn, NPR News, Seoul.
The U.S. Supreme Court will hear a challenge to President Trump's tariff policy. NPR's Elena Moore reports.
This case centers on a move Trump made back in April when he announced sweeping tariffs on countries around the world using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. It marked a stark break from precedent, given that Congress, not the White House, traditionally controls the country's tariff moves. 2 federal courts have since said the policy is illegal. Now, if the Supreme Court sides with Trump, the tariffs would be allowed to stay. But if the justices uphold the lower court rulings, the White House could be forced to refund the billions it's already collected from the tariffs. Elena Moore, NPR News.
This is NPR.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's now 9:04. The St. Johns County Clerk of Courts is warning residents of a jury duty scam. Crooks are sending fraudulent emails or text messages that appear to be from the clerk's office, telling residents they must pay a fine for missing jury duty. A red flag that the message is a scam is the demand for payment through a digital wallet like Cash App or Venmo. The clerk says any legitimate communication from that office will only come by U.S. mail. If you get one of these scams, you're urged to report them immediately. The Florida Holocaust Museum is reopened once again after more than a year of renovations. Eric Stillman is the president and CEO of the museum in St. Petersburg.
The lessons of the Holocaust are timeless, and so is our duty to the memory of the innocent men, women, and children who suffered or died in the Holocaust.
The reimagined museum includes new exhibits, including Thor, a Danish fishing boat that served as a rescue vessel during the Holocaust. Next to Thor is an authentic Nazi-era boxcar. The museum also features security improvements and a new entryway and terrace. It's going to be a nice day of weather here in Northeast Florida. Our rain chances are dropping as we head through the day. Eventually, we'll have highs reach the mid-80s this afternoon, and we'll have mostly sunny skies. More coastal flooding is possible today, along with a high chance for rip currents out at our local beaches. Overnight, lows will drop down into the mid-60s to lower 70s.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. RWJF is a national philanthropy working toward a future where health is no longer a privilege but a right. Learn more at rwjf.org.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, as temperatures rise, so do the risks for pregnant women. We talk to the reporters behind a new investigation into the health impacts of extreme heat, and to a doctor who's advising patients about those impacts. Later, how a hurricane rebuild became the darling of the internet. We ask the owner of the Prince Road Container House about the wild ride from catastrophe to celebrity. But first, extreme heat has been linked to higher risks of preterm birth, low birth weight, even stillbirth, and to increased risks for mothers. It's the subject of a joint investigation by the Tributary and Climate Central. Here to talk about it, I'm joined via video by the Tributary's Investigative Reporting Fellow for the summer of 2025, Mary Beech. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning.
We're also joined on the line by Melba Newsom. She is the Health and Environmental Reporter and Program Director for the Environmental and Epistemic Justice Initiative at Wake Forest University. Melba, good morning. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Here in studio, we're also joined by Dr. Lina Fouad, founder and medical director of OBGYN Specialists of North Florida. Good morning, Dr. Fouad.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, Mary, I'm going to start with you. You tell this story in this investigation that you did of a Jacksonville doula who's worked in that field for 32 years, and she had a troubling story to share about a client who was sort of personally experiencing some of these issues. Tell us what story she shared with you.
Yeah. So basically, when I asked her if any of her clients had struggled with extreme heat, she told me this really amazing story about a client of hers who was 7 months pregnant, and she'd had her air conditioning shut off because she couldn't keep up with the utility payments. And so basically, she went to work one day, and her workplace also struggled with spotty air conditioning, but basically she was just at work one day and she had a job where she was on her feet and she just collapsed. She had to go to the hospital. She had heat stroke. She had $60,000 worth of medical intervention, and she was safe, her baby was safe, but basically she suffered really bad headaches for the rest of her pregnancy. She wound up having to be let go of her job because they didn't provide medical leave. And it was just, I think, a really difficult situation for her. And that story really stayed with Kelly, the doula that I spoke with, and it really struck me as well as just really illustrating how dangerous heat can be for pregnant people in Florida.
And this doula told you that in addition to fainting and having these medical interventions, she was also at risk of going into shock. Her amniotic fluid levels were dropping due to the dehydration that she had experienced. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, Dr. Fouad, what are the risks? I mean, specifically, how are pregnant women uniquely vulnerable to heat, or are they?
Yeah. So it's a major health concern and maternal health issue. And ACOG put out a statement basically alerting providers to speak to their patients about this health concern. And women, pregnant women specifically, are very vulnerable because of the physiologic changes in pregnancy. So there's 5 main things that contribute, among others. There's an increased cardiovascular load in pregnancy. So there's 50% more blood volume being pumped around. So women work harder and they run hotter. So that increases strain, and if you add heat, there's more problems that could happen. We're also pregnant women can't thermoregulate as efficiently, so that's why with heat there's problems when it comes to pregnancy complications. Also dehydration and electrolyte deficiencies. So if you think of it, if you're dehydrated and you're sweating, that blood is kind of shunted away from the placenta and the vital organs. So if it either happens a few days out of, heat days, or over time, there can be preterm birth, there can be pregnancy complications, low birth weight, and at the worst, stillbirth. Other things that can happen in pregnancy are there's increased placenta with heat. There's increased placental stress and inflammation, and with dehydration, there's an increase in a hormone called oxytocin and prostaglandins, which we know induce labor. So that kind of results in the increased risk of preterm labor.
Sure. I mean, oxytocin is familiar to people who've given birth. That is actually something that's like an induction drug, right?
Exactly.
And so heat can actually produce the release of that hormone?
Correct. And also dehydration makes the uterus, because of all the physiologic changes, the uterus can start contracting because it is a muscle, and that increases the risk of preterm birth.
Wow. Okay. And I mean, just for those of us who are listening and maybe don't know, I mean, a preterm birth, there are a lot of preemies that do just fine. They, maybe have to spend a little additional time in the NICU, but, very often there have been a lot of good results in terms of making sure that those kids, survive, first of all. But there can still be some lifelong term risks of being a preemie. So what are those?
Absolutely. So preterm birth, just by definition, is delivery before 37 weeks of gestation. And like you said, with all the advancements in medicines, babies do fine. But there are mostly cardiovascular risks long term. And there's just pulmonary complications, inflammation complications, and they're more vulnerable to getting infections as well. It's a huge health burden.
Melba Newsom, I want to bring you into the conversation. First of all, can you tell us why the folks at Climate Central decided to drill down in particular on the risks to pregnant women? I know that very often we hear about, risks to the elderly, to children, to people who might be unhoused, but I don't know that we've been hearing as much specific to pregnant women. Was that kind of the impetus behind this investigation?
Well, the impetus was initially we did a kind of dug deep and found how the extra days of heat were impacting certain populations. And then they found that in the last 4 years, climate change has added 19 pregnancy risk days. And those are days when it's dangerous for pregnant women to be. This is in Florida. There are different days in different parts of the country, and so they did all of this data mining and mapping to see where the greatest impact was. And as you said, we talked a lot about the impact on seniors and different populations, but it wasn't until I think a study that came out in 2017 that showed that pregnant people should also be classified as vulnerable, added to that vulnerable population. And so that's why we drilled down on it, because a lot of people were not aware of the kind of the impact, and then the multiplying effect, the impact of heat and the multiplying effect of climate change on that.
And so some of the information that is, part of this investigation is looking at worldwide temperature data and how that is increasing as the climate warms. So Melba, if you can, summarize what it is that we're seeing globally, but also, regionally, in places like Florida, when it comes to the number of what are defined as risk days, and perhaps you should define what that is. What is a heat risk day for instance, for a pregnant person?
Well, a heat risk day is when it's like above a certain percentile of the average days. So when it reaches a certain temperature threshold, that is considered a heat risk day for pregnant people. And so they have outlined how many times it got above that kind of average threshold in certain states. But the temperature, what we know is that temperatures are increasing globally. So some places faster than others, but definitely it is a global trend.
Yeah. And Mary Beech, let's talk a little bit about Florida. There is a little bit of a unique situation here, in part because of the climate, but also, as you report in your story, because of the political climate and in some cases the inaction of lawmakers to sort of respond to this growing challenge. Can you talk about, first of all, what the situation is in Florida in a heat standpoint, for people who are at risk, and then what some of the challenges are from a political standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, in Florida, and this is not necessarily unique to Florida, it's a problem in a lot of states, but in Florida, it definitely is true that air conditioning is considered an amenity, not a right for a safe and healthy living space. So there aren't really any guarantees for air conditioning for renters, or even just like people who pay utility bills. So landlords are not required to provide air conditioning, even though they are required to provide heat for those very few days when temperatures dip below freezing. But yeah, their landlords aren't required to provide air conditioning. If there is air conditioning present when a lease is signed, they are required to maintain that air conditioning, but the law doesn't really go into specifics of what that maintenance requires. So basically, if they're like making an effort, they can kind of just provide less than ideal repairs to something that might not be functioning very well. And then that's on the landlord end. And then also on the utility end, there are no laws safeguarding people who pay utility bills, who might fall behind on their payments and then would have to have their electricity shut off. So even if it's the middle of a very dangerous heat wave where temperatures are, at risk for human health, your electricity can just get shut off because you can't afford to keep up with payments. So obviously for people in at-risk groups, like the elderly, like as we've just talked about, pregnant people, that can be very dangerous. And that is, of course, what happened to that client that we were talking about earlier. She couldn't afford to keep up her payments, so her electricity got shut off, and that's why she was in such a dangerous situation.
And what do we know about the number of heat risk days in Florida, how that number is changing and growing, and also just how risky Florida is generally? I mean, the number of people who actually die each year in Florida because of heat exposure.
Yeah. So as far as the number of pregnancy heat risk days in Florida, Florida is notable as having the two cities in the country with the highest number of heat risk days added by climate change. It was West Palm Beach and Miami at 34 and 30, I think. Jacksonville has had, I believe, 9, and these are days in the 95th percentile, so where temperatures are hotter than 95% of days in, I believe, 1991 to 2020, so like, the recent past. So that's heat risk days in Florida. And then, forgive me, I forgot the second half of your question.
Well, first of all, the number of we were talking about kind of the number of deaths that are caused by it.
Right. Yeah. I don't have specific death numbers for Florida, but I can tell you that in the United States, heat is the #1 weather-related killer, and I believe it's responsible for over 2,000 deaths a year.
Yeah, and it does seem unusual that there, aren't those protections, Dr. Fouad, for residents in places that are extremely hot. We talk about you've got to have heat. And as Mary says, there aren't many days where we really have to have heat in Jacksonville, Florida, but there's a lot of days where you feel like if you don't have air conditioning, you're really going to be feeling poorly, whether or not you're actually at risk. One thing that I'm curious about, and I know that both of these reporters touched on in their work, was the fact that the risk of heat exposure doesn't necessarily resolve itself just because you're out of the heat. So if you're living in a hot environment, if you're working in a hot environment, or you're just exposed, just getting cool that day doesn't mean that you have minimized or eliminated the risk to your pregnancy or to your unborn child.
Correct. Just throughout this whole process, it was very interesting for me to learn about all the political aspects, and just the statistics were very impressive. So as far as I think one of the major problems is women of minorities, because of the areas they're called urban heat islands, where there's more paved roads, there's less tree, there's less shades, and as you said, it's not only hot during the day, but it's also hot during the night. And most of the studies, well, two of the big articles I think mentioned before, one was a JAMA article and one was an international Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, went over, they looked at like 30 million births, like stark statistics there. And they saw that women of minorities and the extreme heat and climate change are increasing stillbirth, preterm labor, and low birth weight.
Yeah.
By a lot. And it wasn't always just the amount of heat days, and it's not always just additive. It could just be one exposure to extreme heat. So it's kind of hard to say how much exposure can lead to those complications.
Yeah. And Melba Newsom, I want to bring you back into this discussion, because the question of, heat and how that interacts with, the economics of an area, the health demography of an area. You also talk about how, heat islands and the impacts of heat can be compounded by things like air pollution. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, yes, but let me say this before we move on to that quickly. I wanted to talk about we talk about urban heat islands, which is great because that's focusing us on the danger of heat and how real that is. But it's also important to note that we have researchers who talk about the dangers of rural heat. Even though there's less concrete and pavement, they are at a greater risk because of certain things like lack of proper housing and more energy poverty, people who can't afford to cool their homes. And their homes are like poorly insulated. They're further from resources. The population is generally poorer and more elderly. So you have a vulnerable population. And because of the kinds of work a lot of them do, it's, in certain communities, that's just kind of working outdoors. A lot of pregnant people who do outdoor work are even in a greater risk. So we don't want to overlook that part of the population and rural people. So I'm sorry, you did ask me another question that you wanted to talk about.
No, that's a good point. But I was asking about the kind of the confluence of air pollution and heat.
That was the thing that we talked about. Mary, what did you come up with that shows the connection between air pollution and heat, how it made the air more toxic, and so kind of led to different like respiratory diseases and things like that with the air pollution in those areas combined with heat.
Yeah, there was an epidemiologist I spoke with, and also actually an OBGYN I spoke with, were both authors of a systematic review, and the review actually looked at not only heat but also particles in the air. They were looking primarily at particles in the air caused by wildfires. This was out in California, but it's not just particles from wildfires, it's also just air pollution in general, which increases with climate change. And they found very similar results with heat and air pollution, in that air pollution also contributes to all of these same things: preterm birth, low birth weight, stillbirth. And so the fact that both of those are rising at the same time because of climate change is sort of doubly dangerous for moms.
We should note that WJCT's ADAPT is going to be doing a community discussion here about the tree canopy in Northeast Florida, and that directly, impacts both urban heat islands and the rural community of Northeast Florida. That's a free event at 5:30 on Wednesday, September 17th, and we're going to be talking more about that next week here on the program. But I did just want to point that out, and it is a very current issue that's getting a lot of attention. Mary, I just wanted to ask you about the regulatory issue of AC in Florida. Has there been any meaningful movement or appeals to lawmakers to try to either affect, requirements for air conditioning, or define what it means to properly maintain air conditioning, or to prevent utility companies from cutting off power to people who are in some of these vulnerable groups?
Yeah, there has been some push at the state level. A couple years back, there was a bill introduced. Unfortunately, it died in committee. So right now, we're not really in a terribly good place. It's unfortunate to say, but that's the situation.
All right. If you're just joining us, we are talking to investigative reporter Mary Beech, Melba Newsom as well, along with OBGYN Dr. Lina Fouad, about the risks of extreme heat on pregnancy. You can join our conversation at 904-549-2937, or you can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. So, Dr. Fouad, I'm curious, what you hear, what you advise patients at this point, knowing that some of these risks exist and are getting worse.
Right. So I think that's really important. Just recognizing being hot as not just like an uncomfortable thing, but that it's a really a major risk, health risk. So looking out for the signs of heat, overheating, are in pregnant women, especially nausea, vomiting, increased heart rate, decreased fetal movement. And those are all red flags for dehydration and increased heat in pregnancy. And those are all things that should prompt them to call 911 or seek emergency health care. And also to put out a safety heat plan, as far as just routines, not going out not going out between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. when it's hottest outside. Basically fanning, wearing light layered clothing, having a heat buddy that can check in on them during the heat days, since we're gaining every year about 19 more of those.
Yeah.
So that's really important.
Which is
hydrating.
I think it's worth kind of stopping on that point a little bit too. So this investigation found that for this, we're seeing an additional roughly 20 days. And, that makes a difference, especially for people, bless them, who are pregnant during the summertime,
Yes.
Which can already be a hardship.
Yes.
And so those clients in particular, do you tell them to stay inside, or is it more just kind of being cognizant of the fact that extended exposure and the warning signs are something they need to look for?
Yeah, trying to avoid the outdoors, but sometimes it's just inevitable. Like was mentioned before, some people work outdoors. and they don't have access to AC, neither does their workplace. So staying indoors would be ideal between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. and just having the means to just get a fan and maybe a cold pack, and just looking out for the red flag symptoms and hydrating. Hydrating is pretty important. Drinking every hour, and if there's sweating involved, definitely trying to replace electrolytes as well.
Yeah.
So that's extremely important.
All right. I want to just take a call from JD in San Marco. Good morning, JD. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Good morning. How are y'all? I just love you finally coming around to my topics. I'm actually a retired renewable energy executive. Back when Dickerson was head of in the 90s, was head of JEA, we put the solar on the airport. The fire, they had to tear it all down for the fire. We put the solar on all the little schools. You see little solar banks all over the schools. Well, 5 years ago, I sent a proposal to the city of Jacksonville to return all of these the little rest stop areas where you get on and off the tram, those little areas there where you sit and wait and everything. We could easily turn those into cool down centers using my solar powered atmospheric water generator. And that would be a perfect place for anybody downtown, homeless people or anybody that needs to cool down. As a cool down center, I could do the entire project for less than $1 million. So I bet you Donna Deegan would just love to see that proposal. Maybe I should send it over there to her because this was the other administration.
Not a bad idea, JD. I guess you could try to recycle that, certainly. And obviously the mayor has come up with some cooling center initiatives as well when a heat emergency is declared in Jacksonville. And there is information about that on the city's website. I know that they open up senior centers, but also buses, and sometimes have some other cooling centers. Libraries, that's right. And water distribution and stuff like that. So, Mary, I just would like to ask you, first of all, if you've gotten any response to the reporting that you've done, and, what additional reporting you would like to see done on this topic. What things are out there that you would like to explore or see somebody explore?
Yeah, I haven't gotten any feedback necessarily from the article. I welcome any feedback. You can reach me at mary.beech@jackstrib.org. But as far as stuff in the future, I think just continuing to keep an eye on this. It's something that I feel like not a lot of people are talking about, so just continuing to talk about it. And obviously, unfortunately, this is going to keep escalating as the climate warms and warms. So I think just sort of keeping with the coverage of what's happening. And then also all the other coverage of all the other ways that climate change affects pregnancy and pregnant people. Like in my article, I kind of talk a little bit about hurricanes, like what happens if you are somewhere and the bridges get closed and you can't make it to your hospital to deliver. Again, air pollution, even like, if you're stranded in an extreme weather event like the PTSD, the mental health effects that can cause. There's just so much to talk about in this area.
Yeah, well, excellent reporting by you, Mary Beech, also by you, Melba Newsom from Climate Central, and here in studio, Dr. Lina Fouad. Thank you all so much for the work that you do and for being on today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
All right. Up next, a unique home in St. Augustine is now one of Airbnb's most popular destinations in the country. We sit down with the owner and designer of Prince Road Container House. Welcome back. Well, what began as a home rebuild after Hurricane Irma became an architectural sensation using some interesting building blocks. Here to tell us about one of America's most popular Airbnbs is Rob DePiazza. He's the owner of the Prince Road Container House in St. Augustine. Rob, thanks for being here.
Morning.
It's great to see you. So, Rob, I've known you for a long time.
Long time.
Through many iterations of like my journalism career. But take us back, if you will, to 2017. At the time, you were living in a conventional two-story house in a fairly conventional looking, suburban area in St. Augustine.
Yeah.
Then what happened?
So Hurricane Irma came along, and there's a tree on the property that was always suspect, and it finally fell and destroyed the house while we were in it.
Wow.
And prior to that, but not long, I started working on a project using shipping containers to build art studios. I don't know if I ever told you that.
No.
But,
I mean, you owned an art gallery for many years.
Yeah, so
Screen Arts
I
Gallery.
have a screen printing company, and then I had an art gallery for 10 years. And so, and I started working on this project using containers for art studios. And I connected with a Gainesville architect, Stephen Bender. And we hadn't gotten very far when the house came down, and I just made the spontaneous decision to build.
With containers.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not common even today, but at the time, far less common. And so you were really creating, kind of building the plane as you fly it. I mean, you had to do a lot of research. You had to really locate these shipping containers.
That's pretty easy. Yeah, any port city always has a glut of containers. So
at least pre-pandemic, there was a while where they were hard to come by.
You're right. Yeah. But yeah, it was very hands-on. I mean, I really couldn't hire a contractor to do the job. Fortunately, I had experience with construction projects, so I was able to act as the contractor. Hired the subs, which most of them were friends of mine. So it wasn't a real stretch for me, but what was difficult was managing my business at the time. I had just come off crutches from like some major ortho surgeries. And so it's kind of a
it was a dark patch.
Difficult mix.
Difficult.
Yeah.
And I mean, you were displaced for a really long time from your home.
Yeah. And that's like the only part of the process that was a problem, was the time it took to plan the house, which I didn't anticipate it taking almost a year, because I didn't really have a year to kill,
You didn't have a year to kill.
Well, because, I lost my house. I didn't have a place to live. We rented a house, but then the funding from the insurance company to pay for housing went away really quick. And so I was out of pocket, thousands of dollars a month for housing, which could have gone to construction, but
yeah, but it was still paying for you to rent a place and to live.
Right.
Yeah. So you start the container home project. This ends up being 9 individual containers. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah.
But only 6 make up living space, 5 floor space. So it's 1,600 square feet of living space. So it's kind of deceiving because it looks really massive, because there's 2 containers on the ground, and then there's that tilted container. That's just an architectural element.
Yeah. I would think a lot of people would think, well, you're taking a product that exists, maybe isn't that expensive, and you're stacking them together. It must be a really inexpensive project.
Yeah, absolutely not. It's like the one myth about container houses. If you're building with 2, maybe so, because it's self-contained. You've got the walls and the roof and the floor. But when you're doing a project like this, where you're taking out entire sides of the containers and building back structural, steel, and then just the task of welding everything. It wasn't about the money. It was really purely the aesthetic. And unfortunately there are parts that I couldn't estimate the cost of. And so, 3/4 or 2/3 into the process, I didn't have it. I ran out of money. And so fortunately I got a SBA disaster loan, a really low interest loan to kind of bridge that.
Yeah. I mean, so in addition to it being an unusual project with some unusual materials, I know you well enough to know that you're a bit of a perfectionist about things, and you like things that are nicely done and done with a lot of care and a lot of specificity. And so this house was put together with, artistic touches, but also some really amazing architectural elements. I understand that you just recently spoke to Dwell magazine about the house, and it's obviously been getting a lot of attention. But some of the things about this house, we're looking for people who are watching our live stream. This is the finished product. This is what is currently the Airbnb that is being talked about so much, and it is an extraordinary property. Tell us a little bit about what some of the elements are that make it better and different than just maybe a 2 container home.
Well, for one, it sort of emulated the old house, which was an elevated living space. And, but, really, I look at it more like an art project. And a lot of the details kind of came after we took occupancy, which was crucial. Like I had to get in the house. And so that allowed me to kind of live with things and kind of conceive ideas that I knew I wanted to do something different, but I knew quite what. And so, after living with it, the idea would pop into my head. It wasn't forced. So a lot of it happened organically and just evolved to what it is today. I mean, I still work on it like constantly. It's, there's always some little detail to
Yeah.
with. But
I mean, your gallery, your previous house has always had kind of funky elements to it, and some are carried over to this, including like the jukebox that works and the really high-end espresso machines, and there's certain signature Rob DePiazza elements.
Right.
But there's an enormous collection of artwork that also is part of this, including original Howard Finsters. There's people that showed at your gallery that I'm sure you could name dozens of that are part of the display there. So I guess my first question is, what made you decide to start making this available as an Airbnb after it took you as long as it did to kind of get in the home to sort of self-displays?
Well, the whole goal at this point was to travel, more than in the past. And so I had the idea of when I travel, placed on Airbnb.
Yeah.
So it really is my primary residence. It's not a full-time Airbnb, which quite honestly is how Airbnb started. It started with the concept was to rent a room. You rent a room in your house.
Or like couch surf almost, right?
Yeah.
You could just travel
and then, it became a real cash cow for people because they'd buy a property or they'd turn it into a full-time Airbnb just for the money, which, that kind of ran its course and caused some backlash. And that's why I think it's become so popular is that people know it's someone's home. It's not in fact, we had a famous Airbnb personality stay, Ryan Trahan, and they made the comment that this is like a man's home.
They could tell.
You could, it's like, it's not,
it's not a sterile, decorated Airbnb.
Right.
It is a lived-in product.
So the response to that has been overwhelming. Like people are just grateful, which is kind of ironic because, it costs money. So, but at the same time, they just appreciate, me welcoming them into my home, trusting them, which is a big thing. It's the first question that everybody asks when they're like, how do you trust people in your home?
Well, I'd ask that. Yeah.
You do or you don't. I mean, it's like trusting anything, it's like, it's kind of the basis of everything. So, and I lean towards trusting people. And I think, that people of a certain caliber, they have such an appreciation. And sometimes I come home and I can't even tell there's been a guest. Like it's almost as clean as when they came, so.
Yeah. I guess that's a sign of their appreciation. Let's talk a little bit about Ryan, the YouTuber that came to your house, because that kicked off. I mean, you've been getting attention, certainly in the local market, because the story of your recovery from Hurricane Irma was really dramatic. And, your displacement lasted so long. The home was so unusual. And so it's always kind of gotten a lot of media attention. But this really was next level in part because this guy was a YouTube personality, bringing additional attention, but also because of the project that he was doing at the time, which created its own little, groundswell of internet celebrity. So what was he doing and why was he staying with you?
So I got a booking request. Actually, he just booked it in January of this year. And it was kind of unusual because it was booked for June. And I didn't recognize his name. And he reached out asking for permission to film. And he just casually mentioned a YouTube channel. He didn't boast or anything. And so I looked him up, and he had nearly 21 million followers. And then I watched some of his content, and it's, I can see the attraction. He's very personable, right? And a lot of his projects end up being fundraisers. And so months later, like literally weeks, before he arrived, I discovered that it was a 50 Airbnb, 50 states, 50 Airbnb, so one in each state that they pre-selected as their favorite. And so mine obviously was for Florida. And then they literally stayed in one per day, and he and his wife. And then they ranked them as they went. So for a while, it was number 4, because I think they stayed in my house on day 15. And then it ended up being number 9, so it made the top 10 in the country. And then most flattering was they ranked it number 1 for interior.
Yeah.
Which to me, that was like the main, compliment.
Yeah,
So.
because I mean, it is such a beautiful space. And
But it was a fundraiser for
Right.
St. Jude, I meant to say, and his goal was to raise $1 million, and I don't know where it's at now, because I think it kept ticking, but at the end of the tour, it was like $11 or $12 million.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Great.
really exceeded, because it took on a life of its own. And it was sort of like a contest that they would do. They would have to do little challenges between these things, and each time they would perform a challenge, somebody would commit another big chunk of money,
Yeah.
and so it ended up generating just a ton of money. But your place was, very much a favorite of theirs. It has also, though, gone on to this ranking, that Airbnb itself does about what properties are most popular or most generate the highest reviews, and yours is also on that list of Airbnb properties.
Yeah.
So what
In
is
fact,
its
it was.
ranking?
It's kind of funny because it was ranked. It had a 5.0 rating forever, and I had one guest that nicked me because one of my bathrooms doesn't have a door on it, and they were upset that they didn't have property or privacy in their in the bathroom.
And so it's not a perfect 5.0 anymore. But it is still it's got a near perfect 4.98 rating for Airbnb, which is pretty extraordinary.
So if you book the house, there's no door in the toilet upstairs. Okay?
And don't get mad about it.
Don't blame me.
You've been fairly warned. So is it I mean, I know this, it isn't a permanent Airbnb, which has sometimes been the issue with Airbnbs in communities. Your house is also, though, an unusual property. People drive by it sometimes to check it out.
Constantly.
How are the neighbors with it today? Have they ever been resistant, or has it ever been a problem for them?
No, because in fact, I had a conversation with somebody I don't interact with often in the neighborhood, and they remarked on how there's never been any kind of disturbance or with guests, or that they even knew they were there. Because number one, I only allow 6 people in the house. I disallow parties, or like them renting it as a party house.
Yeah.
I mean, I can certainly throw birthday parties or whatever, but so yeah, everyone's been super respectful. The neighbors love it. There's not a overabundance of traffic. I mean, it's not annoying.
Yeah.
But it does get kind of a constant. People just stop and pause and take pictures, and sometimes get out and. Yeah.
They've stopped wandering into the property.
Yeah, there's been a few. Yeah. And if I'm outside and they start asking questions, because a lot of them have kind of almost researched it, because it's also on Atlas Obscura. And so people have gotten off the freeway to come and see the house. And I'll just give a tour.
Because there is, I mean, in addition to the unusual look of the outside, there's also this massive mural on the outside that you created that sort of commemorates the original house and the disaster.
My friend Riccardo Nanini, he goes by Cane, Cane. He lives in Barcelona. He's an Italian artist, but he flew over, he and his girlfriend Anne, and they painted the mural. And his work's really allegorical. I have a couple of his paintings, and so we just told the story of the storm. So the main character is like Irma.
Yeah.
And she's blowing, and there's a tree falling, and yeah.
Well, it is great that you're back in a safe place to live after all of that, and it's so fun to see the success of the Prince Road Container House. Rob DePiazza, thanks for so much. Congrats on all the success.
It's fun.
All right. Up next, how a series of greeting cards morphed into one of the longest-running off-Broadway shows in history.
AEG presents Sierra Farrell's Shoot for the Moon tour. The West Virginia-born singer-songwriter and multi-instrumentalist brings her Americana and roots music to the St. Augustine Amphitheater, Friday, September 12th. Tickets and information available at theamp.com. Life South Community Blood Centers, providing blood and patient services to the local hospitals, serving patients in this community. Donating blood with Life South helps save lives. More at lifesouth.org to find a blood drive near you.
The Cold War heats up in an explosive new stage adaptation of Stanley Kubrick's iconic film Dr. Strangelove, the dark comedy about nuclear paranoia, political absurdity, and one man's very peculiar plan to end the world. Steve Coogan, in multiple roles, leads a powerhouse cast in this razor-sharp satire, captured by National Theatre Live. Join us September 10th for film at WJCT Studios. Doors open at 6:30, film starts at 7. Get tickets at wjct.org/film.
The trucking industry, and more broadly the freight industry as a whole, still hasn't fully recovered from the business impacts of the COVID pandemic. The amount truckers get paid per mile is still more than 30% lower than it was in 2021. We'll talk about what's being called the Great Freight Recession in the trucking industry. I'm Meghna Chakrabarti. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
The Federal Reserve is changing. That's if President Trump gets his way. He's trying to replace Fed Governor Lisa Cook with an economist who's critical of the central bank's independence. How and why is the White House attempting to exact control over the Federal Reserve? And how could shifts at the Fed affect consumers and our economy? That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Poisoned Soup and the Death of 52 Nuns may not sound like the starting place for a comedy, but the musical Nonsense quickly became one of the most successful off-Broadway shows in history, running for nearly a decade. Here to tell us about a local staging of the habit-forming musical is Charity Walton, actress who plays Sister Mary Leo. Good morning, Charity.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you for being here. We're also joined by Kaylee Byers, the actress playing Sister Mary Amnesia. Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
So, Kaylee, you play one of the funniest and possibly the quirkiest characters in this show. Sister Amnesia, she has been hit in the head by, I believe, a crucifix and kind of lost her bearings. So it must be a lot of fun to play her. But tell us a little bit about the production overall.
The production is really great. I mean, you want to talk about just a show where you can get away with anything. This show is truly just improv. It's a fun night for everybody. It's absolute improv from all of us, and it's just such a fun time for everybody involved.
It's a good ensemble setting. Was it a show that you were personally familiar with before you got cast in it?
No, I was not at all.
Yeah.
I went to the Unified auditions at Limelight, and I got asked to audition for it, and I was like, what is this show? And I watched it, and I was like, man, this is a really great show. I should do this.
Yeah. And we should say, Charity, this takes place in a convent, but it is not like it is not a joke on Catholicism or religion. It is very funny, and it kind of appeals to anybody, really. It's not necessarily, you don't have to be from a certain religious background to get a kick out of it.
Absolutely. Something that we talked about very early on was the importance of humanizing nuns, just in general, right? Like, we think sometimes that they're this separate thing from humans, but they're just normal people.
Right.
And so we really humanize the nun.
Yeah. And it's it starts with sort of a dark premise, as we said. There's this poisoned vichyssoise that kills a bunch of them. The troop of nuns is trying to raise money so that they can properly bury all of these nuns, and they have to stage like a talent show. So
That's right.
what is your character doing in the performance?
Yeah, so my specific character wants to be a world famous ballerina nun. So come see the show. You'll see some ballet in there. So my character specifically has a couple ballet dance numbers in the show. And that's kind of my talent portion of the
and
show.
Kaylee, you actually are a dancer. I don't think you're dancing in the show, but you're a trained ballerina dancer. You do all kinds of dance.
Yes.
But your character relies a little bit more on the kind of slapstick and just the absurdity of her character.
Yeah, in this show, there's a lot of random moments. I never thought I would be asked to do opera and ventriloquism at the same time, but it's a great show. Definitely recommend it. It's so much fun.
How did you personally come to performing dance and theater?
Personally, it's just something I fell in love with. I did a talent show when I was a kid, and I couldn't memorize my lines at all, but I just was like, man, I should actually pursue this. And I did, and I've fallen in love with it since.
And you've moved around a bunch, but this is not your first show in Northeast Florida. You've done a number of local shows. And so what is it about the limelight that appeals to you in particular?
I particularly love just the fact that as an actor, I am able to just like get direction. It doesn't feel like I'm doing 800 things at once. Like I am just able to act and be with my co-stars, and we just have a wonderful set and group of people to work with, and it's just a great space.
One of the recurring jokes of this charity is that they're doing their talent show, these nuns, in a sort of a high school setting. They're competing with the high school's production of Grease, and so there's sort of this coming together of two very different forms of entertainment. And so there's a lot of jokes about that, but your character is also, trying to perform her to her best. I mean, she's a new nun, I think.
Yes. So I'm the novice nun. So I'm becoming a nun. And something what you had mentioned is when I do my ballet, I'm kind of like, this is my time to finally perform. And all the nuns, they're nuns. So they're messing up the dances and, chaos ensues. Come see the show to find out. And meanwhile, my character is like, come on, get it together, like yelling at everybody to kind of like put on a good show because she has this idea that she's going to be a famous ballerina and a nun somehow at the same time. So my character has a lot of fun kind of trying to whip the other nuns into shape of like, we're trying to put on a good show for this audience. But again, they're just nuns. So
you're like, this is my time to shine.
Exactly. So it's a lot of fun.
And you are a recent graduate from Flagler College. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Are you going to stick with theater?
I am. Yeah. I graduated from Flagler College this past May in a degree in theater arts, a minor in music, and a musical theater concentration. So I did performance. And I am just sticking to being an actor.
Yeah. Well, congrats. So this show opens properly on September 12th, I believe, for general audiences. And it runs until October 5th. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
So tickets are available. You can go to limelight-theater.org. And if you go to the show, you'll get to see my guests, Charity Walton and Kaylee Byers. Thanks so much for being here. Break a leg. Have a great show.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for being here. Thanks for listening. That's our show. And if you have feedback or suggestions, you can send them to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. If you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast tonight at 8 o'clock, or you can find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform or at WJCT.org. Our executive producer is David Luckin. Our show's produced by Stacey Bennett, and our associate producer is Isabella Casapow. On the technical side, we're being helped out for the next couple of weeks by Michelle.